this advisory committee be reporting back to facilities or?
Right.
Kind of
Yeah, and really the discussion that we just wanted to have today, well, is that on, guys?
The video, yes.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to stay there and watch that, but you're not gonna.
No, we're gonna take minutes. We talked to Chairman Garrity.
Oh, he wants to
yes.
do it?
Yep.
Okay. So just to give you the history, and most of you were here when we did the advisory committee before, I know I came in kind of late to it. But our goal was to start it was disband after the final report to the facilities committee, after the time that they had to work on it, with whatever recommendations. I think some were taken into consideration, some recommendations weren't acted on. You know, it was just a matter of providing that information to the county board. At the time they disbanded that committee, there was discussion on whether it should be reinstated. Kevin Garrity, as chairman of the board at that time, had decided not to reinstate it. And as we get a little bit closer, and certainly there's been a lot of issues and concerns and ideas that have been coming up with the airport, it had been circulating that perhaps an advisory group would be a really good thing to have again, and to be able to go outside just the scope of marketing and talk about some other things. So it was just a matter of someone saying, yeah, they'll take the lead and try to do this again and, you know, saw value in it. I don't think that the board is heartbroken one way or the other, you know, so what we wanted to do is, Jeff and Ross and I had a chance to talk a few weeks ago. I did a summary of some of the notes that we talked about when we got together, just kind of talked about what's the purpose of the advisory group, is it something that would be useful, what are some goals that we could talk about generically, and then, you know, do we give it a 6-month shot, see if it's useful, and if it's not, disband it, if it is, keep it going, or just have it for that period.
So Rachel, I was part of the original marketing, I guess, Steve. So there was a specific sunset clause in that at everyone's agreement, right? And we had a terms of reference, and we had marketing as the focus, you know, because we didn't want to sort of get distracted and all over. And we had specific membership identified, right? So I think it's useful, if you're going to go forward with this, to have some kind of terms of reference. If you want to have a sunset clause, normally that's a good thing, because in my opinion, other people, you know, don't like the artificiality of a sunset clause. And then that advisory group got chartered by the facilities committee that agreed on the terms of reference, agreed on the membership, and agreed on the sunset clause. And so I would suggest that if you want to have an airport meeting group, that we do some of that, or at least consider doing some of that, so that it doesn't sort of unravel on whoever.
And I appreciate those comments. We discussed it in committee and purposely wanted to make it broader than the marketing. You were very detailed and very specific in your guidelines before. The committee had talked about, and just recently I spoke with Chairman Garrity, and what he had said is he's open to any member from the public. If they have an interest in wanting to be on this, we should invite them and encourage that discussion. We should invite anyone who wants to, you know, be part of that, just to have a dialogue. So they really, in committee, had talked about it being much more broad. But again, you know, I think looking at what recommendations were put into effect and what weren't, you know, I don't know how things are going on the marketing end from the FBO's perspective or from the county's perspective, but I don't know if necessarily we need another advisory group just to look at marketing.
No, I'm just giving you the background of it.
Right.
So I also am on another quasi-committee, and we sometimes call ourselves representatives of the county, and that's the Warren County Safe and Quality Bike Organization.
Oh, okay, yep.
Okay, so that's a little bit different animal, but in terms of it's open to meetings are open to the public. That we do have a board, and we do have not terms of reference, but bylaws, right? And it's not a official sanctioned government thing, but it's quasi-government, and so that's another model to consider if you decide to go with a broad airport group.
Okay.
and I think, just in reference to that, I think there is a resolution recognizing
Oh, absolutely.
that so there is a board resolution, so it is not a governmental committee, but it is a recognized
Right.
advisory.
And that's
But-
what I was
Yeah,
suggesting.
and I guess I came in right at the end of the first conversation regarding ad hoc versus advisory. And I think, and I don't know if you guys resolved that or not, but this is certainly an advisory committee, in my view, and Brian can chime in. But the ad hocs the board established they're only ad hoc in that they're not, permanent standing committees. They're normally for a period of time on a specific purpose. For instance, we have an ad hoc committee, for the park O&M. And the intent was, or no, that's a joint one. We had an ad hoc committee on, Gaslight. There was two different Gaslight ones. Part one was Park O&M, and the other one was, what did we call it? I can't remember now. We disbanded it, but it was a Gaslight Village ad hoc committee, and it was ad hoc. It was all members of the board. It was a committee with all committee authority to pass resolutions and forward to the board and make recommendations of resolutions to the board. So it had that. So it was a board committee. But it was ad hoc in that it was only for a particular period of time. It wasn't anticipated to be a permanent committee. But all of the committee members were board members, as with all the other standing committees. So I think this is certainly in the advisory committee role, not ad hoc. And does that make sense, Brian?
That's my understanding, yes. An advisory committee does not have to be made up of members of the board or the committees. It's a more inclusive or more wide open body, and it has the authority to advise, not to bind the board at all, even though a committee doesn't, but that's a different discussion.
Right.
Yes.
But then if like the advisory committee would have recommendations or advice to the facilities committee, then the facilities committee would initiate a board resolution and pass through, right? So does that make sense? Structurally, I think that's where this is headed, and I didn't go back and look at the Safe and Quality Biking Organization resolution, but I think you're right in that it was pretty broad, and that generally it's a group that is recognized by the board to advise the board on issues of biking within the county, and it kinda left it wide open.
You've dealt with them as staff, right? I mean, their advocacy, so that's you know, we work with the tours. It's not just the whatever. We work with the tourism staff. You know, Joanne was very helpful in our bike challenge initiative and stuff. So, but we don't. You know, we are very county centric because that's our charter. You know, so somewhere along the line, I believe you have to have some kind of terms of reference or charter or bylaws if you want this group to be credible.
So even though and you guys can certainly change it any way you want, when Jeff and Ross and I we talked about it being more of a 6-month process instead of, you know, something that was more permanent. I guess I'm a little hesitant to put all those things in place if it's just for a shorter period of time.
Well, I think the elephant in the room with regard to the Warren County Airport is the upcoming FBO contract renewal, which is 2.5 years out, which you need I believe that the county needs some subject matter input if you're gonna have a good contract. And to me, what I understood the value of the board, of our marketing board, was to have that open discussion where supervisors could hear inputs from the various elements stakeholders at the airport, right? You know, the FBO, the county, the pilots, the taxpayers.
Okay.
And so 6 months is sort of, you know, gonna happen real quick when you have. So I don't know what you're gonna get accomplished in 6 months, but the elephant in the room, from my perspective as the Airport Plane Owners and Pilot Association, Glens Falls Airport advocate, is the upcoming FBO contract.
And just to take you back to a conversation that we had about the planning and the calendar of that, and the reason we initially thought about a 6-month window because we don't really have more time to work with than that. We thought that probably by July of 2016, we'll have, be in a position to start taking, from the
Fast.
17, excuse me, thank you. July, 1st of 2017, that we would have some type of recommendation or discussion or some input that we could provide to the facilities committee, because by September of 2017, they'll start the development of the RFP. By December 1st, there'll be a final draft. By usually the end of January in 2018, the RFP would go out. By March of 2018, our proposals would be due. By June of 2018, we're probably looking for a contract with a board signed and decisions and a selection committee, and then the contract's gonna end at the end of December of 2018. So we looked at it like to be proactive and having some input, because the last time we all recognized it was quick and we weren't as prepared as a community as we would have liked to have been. One of the complaints that we've heard around the board is, you know, we wanna be more prepared and really make those informed decisions, bringing in experts on all different sides of the equation, so that, you know, we can walk into something that all 20 of us certainly are not experts in. And I think we're really starting to see that in many different facets of the county, not just at the airport. So, I think ideally that's what you want whenever you make decisions, right? You want them to be informed and you wanna look at all aspects of it. So that's great. Did I get the calendar just about right?
Yeah, that's about what
Okay.
and then that can be tweaked, but generally I think that's what we envision, to be able to start, you know, receiving proposals and being able to negotiate. Really, the end goal is a board decision by, summer of 2018.
Right.
So
Well,
that
my-
there's a
my view is
transition if
as
necessary.
as you work that issue, some of it clearly will be, you know, competition sensitive, right? But there's no reason why that as things come up in the for instance, you know, the term of the contract, right? I mean, you could come and say, it's gonna be a 5 + 5, that's what we have now, right? Or you could say it's gonna be 20, right? And there's pros and cons to both of those, right? You may go out with a first draft solicitation that has some baselines and then some excursions or options, right? And as you work through those, you may say, okay, we didn't get any bids on this, or we only got 1 bid on this, and we got 3 bids on this. And from my way of thinking, you'll continue to want some stakeholder input in that process.
Right.
I know, you know, there'll be
Okay.
competition sensitive things, but there'll be they're getting stakeholder input, because this is a government owned airport, you know, and we have no airport authority, which is typically the way larger airports you know, are managed. I don't know how if this group is gonna be sort of a place where people can share ideas, I think you're gonna be sharing them right up through, you know, a year from now.
I think that's really valuable feedback. I mean, we had talked, I guess we kind of thought if this wasn't gonna work, we know in the first 6 months. It was really important to the county, and to the board that this not be a political issue. And, you know, I've had a lot of questions about that. How could you have an advisory group for the airport and have it not be political? Well, I think it's important that as a community, that we recognize that the decisions that have been made by the board, we're tasked with carrying them out, both at the board level and in all of our departments. So I think to the extent that we can look at this factually, put politics aside, and really be able to evaluate pros and cons of what's being, you know, what's in front of us, it's important to me that our legal counsel is here and being able to tell us at what point, you know, we go into an area, if we're talking about contracts or the FBO, where we're in a shady area. And, you know, I don't wanna ever cross over into that, because obviously there's a lot of rules around going out for an RFP and that contract. So, you know, I rely heavily on the legal limitations that Brian's going to impose and say, you can't talk about this or you can talk about this. And I think that's a fine line, and one best determined by our council. So, Jeff?
I just agree with Harrison that is the big thing that's occurring, and that's when Rachel and Ross and I met, that was the first thing that came up, that, okay, that's the 20-meter target on the horizon that that we need to get that right. If we get nothing else right, in this group, that has the biggest, impact to the airport, that FBO agreement and how we handle that. And then I think, regarding the sensitivity things, I think, I presume that Rich Air will be competing on that, contract renewal. If their intent is to compete on that, then there might be a point where certain portions of what is going in the final RFP, or what the committee is saying to us when we go back to them, and the committee says is in the RFP, would be kept confidential until it's released to everybody. So I think we'll certainly have to keep Brian in the loop as we go, but we certainly, at the same time, whether Rich Air is competing or not, we want their input on what they think the next contract would look like, or should look like, or what things that, they think work well in the contract or don't work well. That's valuable input. And, I think I agree, though, that we'd have to be sensitive to that, so that we don't create a, unfair environment, for anyone else who's intending on
Well,
competing.
who does do you have a contracts officer? So he's not the contracts expert, are you? There's gotta be somebody in the county who does contract administration, other than the lawyer.
When you say contract administration, what do you mean?
Write solicitations that comply with all of the statutes.
No, the purchasing department, in conjunction with the department head, whose program area is, writes the bulk of the requirements, what we're looking for and what we want bids
Okay.
for. And that's a program decision, and then my office puts them into the format of the contract once they're agreed and awarded. Once they've tabulated the bids and decide who they want to award the contract to, we put those specifications into a contract form.
And sometimes what we do, it's really a combination effort. Sometimes what we do is we develop an RFP that is right, and the purchasing agent worries about municipal purchasing law and kind of all the provisions, equal opportunity provisions. She kind of puts all the standard template in there. The department heads, with staff, will develop the, kind of the operational terms, and the kind of the meat of the proposal of what services are being provided, the scope, and the payment schedules, and the revenue schedules, and all of that. We develop that operationally, and then oftentimes what we'll do is, and this might be a good one to do this on, is as part of the RFP, put a sample or a draft, contract right in part of the RFP. And oftentimes what that does is it makes clarity for those that are proposing on, okay, this is the contract, or this is 95% of the contract that I'm gonna end up signing with the county. And it also makes sure that we don't put something in the RFP, or ask for something in the RFP that Brian determines is legally not permissive, or legally, so we like input from the county attorney's office, early and often.
Well, and with it being such a big, part, it's been such a big issue as it should be, I think it's important to have our county attorney.
Oh, yeah, no,
actively involved.
I don't mean to slight I guess, I don't wanna monopolize the conversation, but from, government contracts that I've been on both sides of, issued and competed with, there's normally some information with regard, let me give you an example. And I don't know how you guys handle past performance, but in the world that I came from, past performance was a big deal, right? And in the bid, in the solicitation, the government would sometimes tell you how much past performance was worth in the overall score of is that comfortable to you guys?
Yeah, we do things like that, but that's really driven by the department, and because the county is so diverse, and all the departments kind of have contracts that are formatted, and contractors that provide all sorts of, it's really, what you're thinking of is really the department head is kind of the contract officer, and that the department head is working with purchasing to develop the RFP, working with county attorney's office to develop the contract, working with staff to make sure the RFP, is what we want and need, and then the department head is recommending award, and then the department head is administering the contract. So we don't have one central contract officer for the county. it's really, because of the diversity of all the departments, I think, at least at the county level. We see that though on state and federal, agencies. There are, maybe those formal positions, but we don't have something like that.
Okay.
And, I think even just what we're talking about is one of the values of getting together and really sharing information and getting as prepared as we can moving into that. They did let me know that the bike committee is an advisory committee, it's established as such, and that 2 supervisors are appointed to that committee. So perhaps a good suggestion might be to ask for another supervisor from the board to be appointed to this committee, providing, I'm sure there's people that are interested in that. So, it might be good to add an additional board member, to the committee. And what I'm hearing is that there's some value to this. Do we agree that there's value to this, or no one really sees the point?
My input's not limited, but I do think there's value. I think you've got a huge question facing the committees and the board in that you have to decide now what you want to solicit for. Because I think the discussions I've heard indicate that there may be a vastly wider scope of services that you're seeking from whatever the contractor is. I think that's you have to know what you want before you can ask somebody to bid on it.
Okay. So, that would be one aspect, certainly a large aspect of this group. In terms of the time frame, it sounds as if it's something that should be open-ended.
Well, I think 6 months is too short. Maybe not open-ended, but if people agree open-ended, my dilemma is, you're getting paid, I'm not, you're getting paid. So there's a time and energy kind of thing, that I'm happy to volunteer at a certain, but, there's a workload here that people will tire of, I guess.
My thought is
Future tennis for sure.
if the group agrees that at least the primary focus is seeking input and development of the FBO options, and whether it's an RFP or, there's other options discussed too, is, county operation, RFP for everything, split, multiple FBOs. But if the group agrees that that's the primary focus, then maybe rather than putting a specific date on it, just state that its goal is through the issuance of either an RFP or a decision by the board as to the direction on an RFP or otherwise with the FBO contract, and with the goal that RFP be, or that decision on a direction, either RFP issuance or other direction, be made by December of 2017. And maybe they make that the horizon, and then that's the goal, but okay, if it ends up being ready in November, if it ends up being ready in January, if the board says next year, we're not doing an RFP at all, we're the county's gonna do all operations. Or we're gonna go a completely different direction, we're gonna try and privatize everything and get FAA approval to do that. So maybe it's kind of that, just set the end goal, but leave it open-ended enough that it's event-driven, not calendar-driven, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, and certainly there's other issues that we'd like to talk about on the committee as well. So perhaps, I'm just throwing this out here, we look at a year, at 6-month mark, we reevaluate, see how things are going. We have a goal of meeting once a month. Is that, doable? What we'd like to do, and I don't know if you were here when I mentioned that Chairman Garrity had asked, if there's members of the public that are interested in being part of this, I guess I would ask that they email Amanda or myself at the board, and that's something then we can make sure everybody's up to date on when the meetings are. But really, it needs to be, I think, more informal and open, very friendly discussion, where we're looking at all perspectives and really respectfully listening to each other. And I think that perhaps this type of an environment would really foster some good conversation about perhaps innovative ideas or different marketing strategies or events that might be good, positives and negatives of what are going on, without getting defensive and political about it. I sound like I'm kind of dreaming here.
And I was just gonna say, I agree with that in the sense that we should incorporate a lot of things in this advisory committee, because my concern is if we focus on just the RFP, I may have a conflict of interest
Sure.
as well, and which would exclude me from all the meetings if that's what this committee's
Right.
gonna be.
Yeah.
The main focus of, and I'd like to see a lot of changes, and I'd like to give input and stuff like that too, so I just wanted to throw that out there to make sure
Yeah.
that that's understood, not that I don't wanna cause a conflict, I just, obviously it's proprietary information.
Yeah.
The
Definitely.
only, just to circle back to the establishment of the advisory committee, I think we can, certainly anybody can come, and I think that we want input from, people, but we do need to establish some rules, and then there has to be something that the committee decides is how we make decisions. And, or agree that no decisions are made and that options will be given, but they could be a wide range. We could have people that say, I think you should do A, and you could have people that say that I think we should do B. And so are we gonna decide between A and B, or are we gonna present to committee both options, A and B? So you almost, if the goal is to have one specific recommendation or advice for the committee, then you really have to establish who are the voting members, from what stakeholders, and, it's majority, if it's gonna be majority votes for those stakeholders, and then, input from everybody, but you know what I mean?
Well, and speaking from a member of the board, and some of those discussions have taken place, I think the goal is actually more towards the options A and B. To have that healthy discussion, come up with what are your alternatives, whether it be a couple different events, or marketing, or the RFP scenario, really taking a look at, we're not as a decision-making group, we wanna be able to go to facilities and say, we're meeting, and these are some really good ideas that have come up. What I really liked about, just the initial planning meeting, when Ross had said to me, there might be ideas that we can implement right away that come up that we haven't thought of. And I think you mentioned to me that happened before, there were.
During the marketing, we looked at our websites, and that was one of the first tasks, and we said, hey, there's work that could be done here. And that got done before we wrote, and in the final report, we made recommendations, and some of them were unanimous, some of them were, sort of like a legal brief, we included the dissenting, or the minority for completeness sake, and when we briefed, Mason was elected chair of the board, of the committee, and so he did the briefing, and we did try to, it was a collegial, and I think one of the reasons that you liked it was that there was a lot of information that people otherwise didn't have, available to them, but to Jeff's point, you have to decide whether you're gonna, make recommendations, or just, foster options, and if otherwise, so one of the frustrations of these boards, if you don't get anything done, is keeping people interested.
I was just gonna say, it could also be used as a tool for the other committee meetings, and that if there is a question, they can throw it back to this committee saying, hey, can you guys expand this further and see where the answers may be that we're looking for, I think that's one of the benefits that you were trying to push for, and I can see as a huge benefit, and we can work out the details in this committee, and then get it, streamlined for the actual voting for resolution, per se, if it comes to that.
Absolutely.
Rachel, the other thing I would recommend that we include on here is somebody who is a Balloon Fest advocate.
Okay.
Right, because while that's only a 3-day event, it's really a big deal to many people, and there's ideas I think that can make it better, and there's issues that the pilots have.
Sure. I think that would be a nice way to kind of facilitate some dialogue about, some pros, some cons, how we can make things better. I think the goal of this really should be collectively in making, that, probably sadly my phone, making this process friendlier and more open and more effective, and again, trying to look at something objectively. I guess I'm just wondering then, at this point, are we gearing more towards presenting options to committee, you know, or, recommendations. And I think that's really just what we need to decide on how we're formed.
I think use more than the options. Then it becomes a exploratory tool, you know,
Mhm.
a tool for the committee and for the board to come up with the different options and explore them in some depth, and give some pros and cons. Just personal opinion.
Any other thoughts?
No, I would agree with Brian too, just in the fact that we're advising them
Mhm.
decisions. We don't have authority to vote on a resolution, so, yeah, I agree with that.
EDC's case, you're looking for the, you know, we can be helpful in terms of gathering information.
Sure.
It's always been a big part of it, and a big problem is making these big decisions without, if there's a way that we can help facilitate, gather more information is
Yeah.
relevant to this decision process. I mean, that's, I think our role will be best, as far as us picking and choosing or advising. I don't think that was anything that
Right.
we really wanted to do or saw ourselves being part of, but gathering information, I think, from hopefully what we can get, that'll make the options look a little bit more viable one way or the other, or whatever, and it'll be easier for somebody to decide at the committee level.
Yeah, and I'm definitely a little more comfortable with that. You know, I have so much respect for the board that was put together before for the marketing purpose. And like you said, Harrison, I learned a ton. But I think there is some frustration in working for, what was it, 2 years? And making
18 months.
Yeah, you know, and like you said, you're volunteer. You know, at the end of the day, you're making a recommendation that may or may not be followed, and certainly you've put a lot of work into it, but being able to say, you know, here's some different options, we may not all agree, and that's okay, you know, but here's some viable things to take a look at, and really encourage and foster that healthy dialogue. And I think the board's looking, the committees specifically, I know Dan is very supportive of the idea, Dan Gerard, and wanting to have as much information at his, you know, fingertips to be able to start facilitating those discussions, but not just about the FBO contracts, about, you know, whether a host of different things. And I think you're right, you know, bringing back to saying, could your group take a look at these issues? We're interested in that. Any other thoughts on that? If you think that's more of a role, we're going to be advisory in nature, provided we're going to gather the information, we're going to provide different options, look at different issues that come up that are relative to the airport, and do you feel there still needs to be a charter in place, Harrison? I mean, now that we know it's going to be a little more broader, what's the guidelines of what needs to be drafted, or maybe that's more of a question for Brian?
I think it could be you know, a simple mission statement, that's, you know, a particular duration. I'm hearing a year, and the object is to come up with options for the committee to consider on the continued operation and improvement of the airport.
So I would say, I would add into that, share information, to John's point, you know. I think that's a challenge for a lot of reasons, but this can be a venue to share information, and, you know, reasonable people can disagree, you know, that's part of, you know, people interpret data differently, but I think sharing information should be the big focus, from what I gather from your sort of, and somewhere along the line, you know, we gotta get, in my mind, we have to find a way to sort of get into the Rotary mentality of, you know, four-way test. How do we build trust? And there's a large trust gap when it comes to the airport right now, and I think if we can facilitate any mending of that lack of trust, then we've accomplished something.
And gentlemen, because it appears it's all gentlemen, I am confident that we can. I think that this can be something that is very productive, respectful, encouraging, and provides a feedback and a tool for our committee that, as many of you may have noticed, we struggle a little bit lately in our committee meetings with information and being able to, be prepared on some of the topics that we're talking about. And I think it just comes down to different opinions. So this would be very helpful in providing those different options to the committee. And most importantly, getting a jump on one of the biggest decisions we're gonna have, down the road as it relates to the contract, into the RFP. But so for the people that are here, are we committed to once a month? Can we pull that off at least for a while? And then,
I'm gonna go back to the two pilot organizations that I represent, the chapter of the Experimental Aircraft Association, and Bill Shediger is the president of that, and the Glens Falls Pilot Association, and Dave Morrissey's president of that. They both selected me to represent them along with the AOPA role. So they may have other people who wanna be a part of the committee, and well, I need to do a resolution or a rev on that, and I can attend as, whichever hat I wanna wear, but I think it's useful to for me to reach out to that group of stakeholders, which I have come to represent.
so if I'm hearing you correctly, you'll ask them if there's an additional person that would like to be represented. Perhaps Jeff or Ross could reach out to someone with Balloon Fest and see if they'd like to be part of this. Would that be all right? Travis, for now, I mean, you look like the only community member, and sure, but if you wouldn't mind, and if there's other people that express interest, certainly, let's talk about them and invite them in. I've spoken with Washington County, their chairman of the Board of Supervisors. He is not at this point inclined to say, yes, he'd like to be part of a regular meeting, but to the extent something comes up that involves Washington County, he's happy to attend, happy to provide input, but won't be doing so on a regular basis.
And I think that's where Balloon Fest probably fits as well,
Yeah.
We don't need to drag them through some of the other issues. I guess the other thing I would mention is that we actually collectively, the county and support from the pilots, have an active solicitation to host an event next year. We haven't been selected, but we submitted a proposal that Gerard and a whole bunch of, you might not even be aware of it, it was before your time. I think Garrity signed it too, but to the airport, to this group, to host a regional fly-in.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And we haven't had much interaction with the AOPA, but.
I actually just heard from them a couple weeks ago. We didn't get selected for 2017, but we're still in the running for 2018 or possibly even 2019. So he still wants to continue the dialogue, but we're not going to be hosting for 2017.
Okay. Well, that's an update for me.
Which I took that as, it was an encouraging email. It wasn't a quick, hey, you weren't selected, thanks for trying. It was, because it's a new venue for them, they really wanted more time, and they wanted to make sure that the county was still interested in pursuing it in the future, and they wanna continue to talk.
It sounded like their decision was primarily surrounded around the fact that we're upstate New York, and it was for that
They wanted
our
New
region,
England.
for the different parts of the country. Yeah, they're thinking that 2017 upstate New York is not where they wanna be.
Okay. Can we work on the mission statement together? Okay. Okay. And I think if we plan once a month, 1 hour, we don't need to be here, hours on end. But if we plan on 1 hour, doing some things behind the scenes with some emails in terms of the agenda and things that you wanna talk about, I will clarify with the chairman in terms of, televising and the YouTube and the minutes taking, it doesn't seem to me that would be too cumbersome if we just did it 1 hour a month. But that would certainly take care of that, record keeping. And typically, going into December, we don't have committee meetings. But if we could look at the January schedule, I think it works well to put it on our calendar of events. It certainly lets everybody know what's going on. And, we can work with Amanda to get a date that would work in January. And in between that time, talk about some agenda items that we wanna get on there and really start focusing on.
Yeah, that's fine. Ross or can you give us a rundown of item 2, grant where are we with grant opportunities? Is there
And
any,
Harrison,
anything?
can I just clarify what this list is? This isn't actually like a reporting list for today. This was more, I'm sorry, we haven't really talked at all about what's on this form. This was more of just a very informal conversation that we had about what are some things that this group could provide benefit-wise? You know, is it talking and identifying maybe some grant opportunities that someone knows about, the other person doesn't, or some things we could do? Social media, you know, how are things going with Rich Air with that? Is that something we can incorporate and tie back to our county website and to our social media? You know, just these are ideas of maybe there's an increased service, maybe there's something a business is interested in partnering, you know, maybe just bringing together the private and public relationship that we're able to foster in this community, you know, in this setting. So these are things that we can certainly talk about in the future, and add to actual agenda items, you know, but this was just a generic, like, everything we could really cover and talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we have 15 minutes, what else are we gonna talk about?
Well, you know, we certainly have the option of ending early, but we can talk about whatever you would like. My goal today was, A, is there interest? There seems to be. B, do we feel it's beneficial? And C, how do we structure ourselves? How often do we meet? And so it sounds like, and who's on it? It sounds like we hit all those areas. So, hey, we can talk about whatever you would like, Harrison.
Well, I'd like to know about the grants in the pipeline, and what your guys' vision of that is, and maybe how we can help. For instance, you know, the hangar grant, that's a way to state,
Yeah, the state hasn't officially announced the next round of solicitations yet for any of the state grants yet, so we're still waiting for them. And typically that's held up in the executive office.
so are you familiar with what they're talking about with this hangar grant?
I want the answer to be
Well,
yes.
yeah,
But,
well, that's why I bring it up. Okay, so, you know those old hangars that are full of dents because we plow snow on them and all that? The idea is to build the hangars, south of there where the tie downs are now, and make that the tie down area.
the
Okay.
county doing that, not
And that-
Rich Air doing
Correct.
that.
This is one of those items we've already gone through committee and the board, and that's underway. So we actually, Ross and I were with the Pilots Association the other day and gave them an update on that. But I think, like for any new or future grants, you know, I think we certainly want you guys to be aware of the overall extended plan on the airport improvement program. And, you know, but that hangar grant, that's already underway. We're just developing it now because the formal solicitation hasn't come.
Yeah, but again, so this is in my mind, this is a perfect example of why we're sitting here, right? You should know that has already been approved, because somewhere along the line in committee,
I
you
should
raised your hand
remember a lot
and
of
said,
things, but
I approved that, right? That you approved Ross doing it. No, let me finish.
Okay.
But there are issues that come up with that we collectively can be more supportive, right? If someone has an issue that getting rid of those hangars is, you know, for instance, say somebody wants to put a King Air here at Glens Falls in the ESMI hangar, right? They can't do that because they can't taxi past the telephone poles. So I think that we collectively need to understand how we can be supportive of that, right?
Mhm.
That makes it a stronger case so that we can get the grant versus, you know, not get it. That's
Yeah,
the kind of thing
certainly,
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I also think it's important that as we plan the agenda for the meetings, that we have somewhat of an idea of what we wanna hit on to be prepared. You know, and for me, if I knew that was a topic that we would be talking about, I certainly would be going back in my committee notes and talking with you guys to
So,
be prepared, but.
like, just on that specifically, like, this is kind of one of those items that, is, you know, one that we can easily just bring it up, there's an issue, pass it to Ross, and Ross get with the Pilots Association, they certainly have the biggest input on that. And there's no reason, I don't think why, when the application is drafted and developed, that we don't share it and say, hey, how can we make this stronger, or what do you guys
And
think?
he and I have already talked about this.
Yeah, so I know, like, with the marketing advisory committee, there were issues that came up, like we mentioned before, that were like, hey, that's a good idea, Ross, do it. And it was like that, or get with Billy Bob after the meeting, and you guys sort that out, and we'll implement it right away. And that's certainly things that, you know, anything that comes up like that, that's already in Ross's wheelhouse, we'll just address, so that's a good point.
I think that's a great benefit to just having the dialogue, you
Right.
know, and certainly brings to the attention too, you know, things that are, you know, could be missed or are important, and we wanna know if there's issues with that. And I just really see it as a great public-private relationship that, can foster healthy discussions.
So can we go down your list? Anybody, I mean, I don't, do you wanna talk about any of these traffic?
Probably the most interesting, everything else is, you know, apple pie.
Well, I guess number 4 for me is lunch at the airport.
Did you say apple pie?
Apple pie.
I was hearing things. I'm sorry, what number, Harrison?
So increased services, breakfast and lunch. Right, from a pilot standpoint, we're disappointed that, you know, there's no longer breakfast, and there's no longer lunch. And Steve and I have had this discussion, so I'm not, you know, blindsiding him, but there's not even a candy machine, you know, for pilots who come here on a solo cross-country that can, you know, grab a Snickers bar. And so that, I would put that in, that's an input for increased services.
Is that something maybe that you can talk to Rich about, or the county could talk about, and we, you know, could come back and discuss that and have some proposed ideas? You know, so that in January we can do a little bit, my big thing is give us time to do homework, right? All of us are gonna need that, to be fair. So, you know, is that something maybe we could put on the agenda for January?
Sure, I mean, we can, I mean, it's not much to talk about, unfortunately, and on far end, we've already looked at it essentially briefly right now. And, the problem becomes in the wintertime, there's hardly a lot of traffic coming in to Glens Falls. And that's one of the biggest issues that we're having, and I think that we need to focus more on that than trying to get food for the people that aren't there. As far as the restaurant aspect of things, you know, that's a separate business that I have no control over. It was a business decision that was made that, during the winter hours, they're no longer serving, any lunch.
Actually, it's in the contract, so, I mean, in the,
Right.
the county
Believe so.
modified the
Yeah,
contract,
we
or it
only-
was in the contract.
It was, you're absolutely
It
right.
was in the contract.
It was in the contract, and, we took that up, with, Brian's predecessor, and he just
Right.
said, this is forbearance, okay, we'll go ahead and modify these hours and such. More than it being in the contract, I remember when this whole thing was, presented about getting rid of the cafe, that, you know, I heard words out of Mr. Skimmerhorn's mouth that, oh, yes, you know, it's important to have, you know, breakfast, and, you know, and it, now, it didn't develop into that, and, you know, that wasn't in the contract, you know, these words weren't in the contract, but, you know, if I were there listening to that and saw what eventually happened, I think I'd feel that I was misled. So I think that, Harrison has a good point here, and that, you know, the contract should be looked at, and where there's areas where there should be forbearance, there should be forbearance, but,
I think this is, you know, this is one particular item that could lead to a, discussion of what the options are. You know, certainly that could modify the FBO RFP, and that, so that, Steve is right in that the restaurant ground lease is a ground lease, it's a different entity it is not Rich Air that runs it is Skimmerhorn Development or Aviation or some other development arm of you know, Rich's businesses. And so, you know, one option is, with the new RFP, is that we authorize other food vending. There could be a breakfast, lunch cafe in the terminal, and there could be a dinner-only restaurant outside, or it could be that there might be an option in the near term, given the contract that we're in now, there could be an option in the near term to bring in a separate vendor, and the county might want to explore that. But there could be, you know, multiple options, so that it could have a long-term, options regarding the FBO contract as it's written now, and how we address the new FBO, if there is one, to provide food service. And there could be some short-term options that maybe the committee explore, or this advisory committee explore.
And just to be clear, I'm not against Harrison, 'cause I miss breakfast and lunch, trust me. I really do. But again, like Jeff was saying, it's a separate entity, but that would be something we'd have to look at.
Yeah, and maybe that's something, let's put that on the agenda for January, because I know in Saratoga, right, they have a candy machine and some snacks, and that's certainly helpful, and you make a good point that, you know, perhaps you've got people in there that just wanna grab something real quick and go. But I think we do have to look at that contract and what was decided by our previous county attorney, and we'll have Brian take a look at that, and maybe you can, you know, just kind of start that discussion with Rich, that it's gonna be talked about, maybe there's a simple solution, you know, without getting defensive about it.
And there might be a near-term option that I can turn to Ross and say, Ross, call Julie Pacina, who oversees the county vending contract, and have them add machines at the airport.
Yeah, and that, again, that's kind of the value I see in this meeting, you know, trying to find, because that was, to me, when I read your list, that was one of the things that jumped up at me.
That's a good idea. And I think those are, you know, I think this is a good venue to have those discussions in, and if we can have some of those ideas, and, you know, I'm happy to coordinate with our clerk of the board, you know, agenda items, you know, so feel free to email those over, and to the extent, you know, we'll kind of figure out what we can get in that hour, and then if we've got time, like we do today, I think these are all really important, discussions and feedback to have, because ultimately, we wanna make it, you know, as friendly, user-friendly as possible, and decrease expense and increase revenues, and really look at, you know, how can we work collaboratively together.
So, I think it would be useful to have the, again, not in January maybe, but, you know, Geneseo Airport has gotten revenue neutral. So, in the big scheme of things, the FAA's goal with airports like ours, is to be an integral link in the overall national airspace system, or national airport system, right? Because one of the things we keep missing here, and I keep harping on, and we put it in our report, is, you know, having this airport, if there's a crisis, an emergency, either natural or man-made, will pay all of the money that we've invested for many, many years, because, you know, the airports have proven themselves around the world and around the country as critical emergency resources, okay? I don't think that's appreciated by the local or the typical, and maybe that's because, maybe my heart is there because I flew all over the world with humanitarian supplies for 20 years, right? You know, places that you would never dream of, that the U.S. transport, you know, we were flying cargo into. And, you know, we think it's never gonna happen in the U.S., but we saw that on 9/11, that it could happen in the U.S. So when the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya got bombed in 2009, we were shipping water and cops and everything into that location to stabilize it. And people in the U.S. never thought it would happen in the U.S., right? And I think most of the people in little old, you know, Washington, Warren County, just see our airport as sort of, you know, a bunch of rich people just doing their thing. And in fact, it's a huge, in the FAA's vision and the U.S. vision, it's a huge tool, and that's why Schumer supports it. Schumer sees what we do with airports, whether it be Haiti, where there's no roads after an earthquake, or it's Albania, where, you know, there's, and I think that's something that, I can get off my soapbox, but we haven't really come to appreciate it like I do.
And certainly you're very passionate about it, and I think what's important that we bring to this table is balance, you know, and really sharing those ideas and being able to provide that education aspect, but also not stereotyping and not generalizing. So, you know, I think this is a wonderful first start. You know, I wanna be careful not to have it be, well, we did this in our marketing group before and we formed it this, like, this is kind of a fresh start, it's much broader. I'm hoping it's again, looking at those different options, and you know, that passion and that experience is really important to hear, as well as it is to hear from our local residents, being able to hear from our economic aspects, our municipality, our FBO, the invested groups, the not-for-profits that we utilize, and of course the board. So I think if we can look at it as a collective, holistic approach, we can really, even if we look at today's example, I mean, if we walk out of here and we're able to have a vending machine that, you know, in the short term satisfies that need, that's a win. Let's be positive, and if we can look at some of those breakfast, lunch options moving forward, kind of talk about what we want on that agenda, talk about different grant opportunities, then we're accomplishing the goal of having a group like this. What do you think? Does that sound good?
Mhm.
So we'll go forward with that, developing of the mission statement, our partners, you know, we'll schedule our next meeting in January. We'll be towards the end of January, we'll meet once a month, we'll evaluate at the 6-month mark, we'll hopefully go for a year, and, you know, hopefully be as open and accepting and cordial as we are right now.
We wanna try to pick a time, I mean, I think we met the third Thursday of some meeting time, or do we wanna pick a
Yeah.
date in January right now?
To be honest, if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to try to coordinate it with our committee schedules, because I
Okay.
do think that there's
When
people.
do they get published?
Well, when do they get published? Right before our county board meeting every month, so usually the Wednesday, so like the, second Wednesday of the month, they're usually published, right? So you'll know coming into, you know, you'll have at least a big on advance notice.
Yeah, though, that's why I was.
Yeah, yeah, so that we can plan ahead.
That work for you guys?
Yeah, I think normally for, county staff, the few days ahead of the board meeting are usually actually less.
Oh, okay.
Because
You've
the
already
committees have already met. I don't know how you guys feel about that, as far as providing somebody like if we met like the Tuesday or Wednesday before the board meeting. I know you guys put the agendas out on Tuesday, right? So you're probably, the final agendas get mailed out on Monday or Tuesday, right, before the board meetings?
Usually we've been sending everything the Thursday before.
Also over like 10 days before.
Before the board meeting, 'cause they go out in the mail, so.
So, for me, usually the week of the board meeting, I'd have no meetings down here, and I can focus on other outside groups and everything. So, if we said that the board meets every third Friday, if we said we're gonna meet the Wednesday before the board meeting, that would work great, or the Tuesday, or even the Thursday before the board meeting are typically wide open on the county schedules.
I guess, you know, what do you think of this idea? Because I'm trying to avoid, you know, we've tried to get to a consolidated meeting schedule to really allow an opportunity for as many people to attend meetings that are possible. What if we did it before the board meeting, the big board meeting? Like, we meet at 10, what if we met, you know, or is that a pain for you guys, the morning of the board meeting?
It can be
Yeah.
kinda difficult, yeah.
Let's do this, why don't I speak to Amanda, see what works for the county, and we'll coordinate, you know, and see when would that be okay, and?
So the options I heard is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday before the board meeting, or 8:45 to 9:45, or 8:30 to 9:30 the day of the board
It
meeting?
sounds like that's probably not gonna work, for our staff here. So it's not, and to be fair, it's always crazy, the morning of the board meeting. Ideally, we'd like to keep it with a committee schedule, again, to encourage as much participation as we could. But why don't I talk to Chairman Garrity on who he would appoint, because he's going to, you know, we'll have another board member, and see what they think, would work best. And, you know, you don't have to decide it right now, but
Right.
we'll certainly have enough notice, I promise.
Great.
Does that sound good? All right, thank you very much for all the input and for coming, and I think we're off to a good start.
Thank you.
Harrison, you have to run.